The Roy Grace books are a series, 6 so far, of which Dead Like You is the latest, all set in my home city of Brighton. And the central character is a detective superintendent in Sussex, CID. Your equivalent here, I guess, is a CIB. And with each novel, I tend to take a kind of theme that intrigues me and write about it. So the starting point is always usually a true story that I've heard that I then fictionalize and change. Like Dead Like You is based on a serial rapist in England who took his victim's shoes and he only targeted women wearing very sexy stiletto-heeled shoes. And I always try to write from a perspective of both not only the police but also the perspective of the perpetrator. You know, who are these people? And also the impact on the victims. My previous novel, Dead Tomorrow, the central theme of the novel is the world of organ transplants, and it's about a mother who has a 15-year-old daughter who's going to die if she doesn't get a liver. And the mother panics that she's not going to get one in time, goes on the internet and tries to buy an illegal one. And the third one back, which is the fourth in the series, Dead Man's Footsteps, it's partly set in Melbourne. It's about a guy in England. This is something I've always been interested in. The guy who fakes his disappearance in order to reinvent himself in a new life. And I've always been intrigued, is this possible? How would you do it? And in Dead Man's Footsteps, it's a guy who happens to be in New York on the morning of 9/11, and he should have been in a business meeting in the South Tower at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the whole thing comes down, and he realizes everyone's going to think I'm in there. And he contacts his wife, and he says, play the grieving widow, collect my life insurance money, and we'll meet in Australia in a year's time. Everybody says to me, why do you set your novels in a hip seaside resort? You know, why not choose somewhere that's a real hotbed of crime, like Melbourne? But the answer is that Brighton has got a very long criminal antecedent. I mean, it began life as a smuggler's village. In the 1840s, when they built the railway line, London was not a nice place to be unless you were very rich. All the villains in London came down to Brighton, and they bought prostitution, cockfighting, protection rackets, gambling, illegal gambling. And Brighton sort of became a kind of dirty weekend, kind of low-life underbelly to it. And in the 1930s, there was a series of dismembered women's torsos found in luggage railway lockers around Brighton and surrounding Sussex. And Brighton got the sobriquet murder capital of Europe and crime capital of the UK, and it's never lost it. And when I was a teenager, the book that made me want to be a writer was Greene's Brighton Rock. And I read that first when I was 13, and it was written in 1937. And it was about my city, and it was a book that really opened my eyes, because up until that point, all the crime novels I'd read were the kind of very cozy Agatha Christie, The Body in the Library, and the solving of the puzzle. With Greene, for the first time, I read a novel where you actually got to know and got interested in the inner lives of the perpetrators. And his creation, Pinky, I don't know if anyone's knows the book, but sorry, I shouldn't say that, should I?
No, his character Pinky from there, yeah.
The character Pinky it's a truly extraordinary creation. He's a gang leader in his late teens, razor gang leader, and yet this guy's a Catholic. We learn about his kind of guilt, his fear of retribution for what he's done, his prayers for absolution, and it makes an extraordinary rounded character. And I learned a lot from that novel, and I vowed when I read Brighton Rock for the first time that one day I would try and write a novel set in Brighton that was 10% as good as Graham Greene's book. And I think every writer can learn from Greene, because what Greene does, two things. One is he always has a fantastic hook in a book. And the second thing is he paints wonderful brushstrokes. He doesn't necessarily say you're 5'8", curly hair, beard. He'll describe somebody in a sense the way they dress. It makes you feel you've known them all your life. And he's a great one for hooks. I learnt this very early on with him. I mean, Brighton Rock has got one of the most grabbing first lines ever written in a novel. Within 30 minutes of arriving in Brighton, Hale knew they meant to kill him. I defy anyone to not read on. I was first really influenced by Ed McBain and the kind of 39th Precinct and all those novels, were hard-boiled. And then when I was in my late teens, I read this amazing character that John D. MacDonald wrote, Travis McGee. Travis McGee lived in the Florida Keys on a houseboat called the Busted Flush. And he drove a Rolls-Royce pickup truck that had been converted. And he got things back for people. And I realised you could have a detective who didn't need to be the sort of plodding, right, I was proceeding in a westerly direction down the Western Road when I apprehended this. You could have a cool, laid-back dude. And I loved that. And then I read, if you like, Elmore Leonard was a massive influence on me. And then even early James Paris and the Idyllic Crosses, where you have a detective story, but actually you are grabbed by the throat as a reader from the first line. And the writer does not let you go until the end. And those are the kind of books that I try to write now. Britain has always had a fascination for crime because it's a country that's got a natural, deep embedded darkness in it. You know, the English kind of history, which goes back such a very long way, both its history from kind of wars, its history in criminality, its history in the supernatural. And in a way, Britain today, and Britain has owned, if you like, the traditional crime novel. America has owned the traditional serial killer novel, in a sense. Personally, in a way that I write, I'm more aligned to the American style than to the UK style. I've spent a lot of my working life in the States making films, and that's had a big influence in the way I write. I'm not that enamored with the classic body in the library kind of English crime. They call it the cozies in America. When I started writing crime, I realized that to understand the world of the police, I had to find a way into it. And I was very lucky. About 15 years ago, I developed a number of... I got burgled, actually, 21 years ago, just when I'd written my first ever novel, and this detective looked at the book when he was doing fingerprints. He said, "Oh, was that you?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, if you ever want any help." And my then wife and I got friendly with him and his wife. And I rapidly realized they inhabit a culture and the world of their own. Almost all police officers, most of their friends, are other cops. And that's because, A, it's the society in which they mix, but B, more importantly, it's the society in which they're comfortable. They can be sitting at dinner with friends and talk about some horrendous crime scene or some terrible accident they've been to. I found myself out at dinner with my own friends and talking gaily about a lobster that was just eating somebody. And people are throwing up at the dinner table, but cops don't. And through these original friends, I started networking more and more, to the point where today I spend an average of a day per week out with the police, and it gets some really funny situations happening. I know it happens quite the way you imagine it's going to happen in real life, and sometimes I've been quite scared. I was just an amusing incident 2 years ago. I was out on patrol in a very rough area of Brighton, 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and I was with a young sergeant and a very young, fresh out of probation period, Indian policewoman officer. And there were 10 guys walking down the street, all drunk, all drinking. And drinking on the street is a criminal offence in the city of Brighton and Hove. And they stopped the car and they got out. And I got out the back seat, and I'm wearing a fluorescent police jacket. And I'm standing at the back making notes. And I could see this thing was about to kick off. It's getting really ugly. They're hurling racist taunts at the woman officer. They're saying, "You can fuck off, you're not taking our fucking bottles off us." And they're readying for backup. But backup can take 20 minutes. that time of night. And I'm thinking to myself, do I get back in the car? Do I do a runner? Or do I stay and fight? Because this is going to turn into a fight. And I thought, the only way I'm going to keep respect, I have to stay and fight too. So I'm gearing myself up. And one of them points to me and says, who the fuck's he? And the sergeant said, he's with the FBI. And they all went, they backed off, handed over their bottles, became like little pussycats. Respect.